Arizona Territory. 1877, the wind carried the scent of scorched mesquite and dust as Elijah Vance dragged her boot across the blood-stained sand, burying the last ember of the morning's fire. The desert didn't care that she had not slept. It didn't care that she had 2 children curled up in the shade of a wagon that was missing a wheel, or that her husband had lit out 2 days ago and never looked back. It was near noon. The sun didn't blink. Elijah tucked a strand of sun-bleached hair behind her ear and pressed her lips into a straight line. The boy, Samuel, barely 6, stirred beside his sister, Susanna, who was still too small to understand anything except that her mother's arms meant safety. Elijah hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She'd offered the last of the beans to her children and told them she wasn't hungry. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, not fast, not threatening, just steady. Someone coming easy. She reached for her rifle, but her fingers trembled. It had not fired in months. The man that appeared over the rise rode a tall chestnut gelding and wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Dust streaked his coat and boots, but the rifle slung across his back said he came ready. He stopped 30 feet away, dismounted slow, and held out both hands so she could see them. "I ain't here to cause trouble," he said. "Name's Silas Rourke. You look like you could use a hand." Elijah didn't lower the rifle. "I do not take charity." He looked past her to the wagon, then to the children. "You alone," my husband left, took the other horse and most of the water, said he was going to find work in Tucson. Her voice cracked. "That was 2 days ago." Silas's jaw clenched. He nodded once, then stepped forward. "You got a wheel busted. You're not getting far like that." She said nothing, watching him closely. "I can fix it," he added. "No charge. Not looking to take anything from you. Just reckon no one should be left out here like this." "What do you want?" He stopped 3 feet from her. His eyes didn't wander. They stayed right on hers. "I do not want to cook," he said, voice low like it hurt to speak. "I want a partner." "You hungry or just lonely like me?" Elijah's grip on the rifle loosened. Her shoulders dropped a little. The silence stretched. Finally, she said, "You fix the wheel, and I will let you stay until sundown." The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, just relief. "Deal." By dusk, the wheel was repaired. Silas had stripped down to his shirt sleeves, hands covered in grease and calluses. Samuel had followed him around like a shadow, asking questions. Silas answered every one, patient and calm. Elijah had not meant to cook for him. But when Susanna started crying, Silas had reached into his saddlebag and handed her a wrapped parcel of smoked venison. "Got plenty," he said. She'd cooked it with the last of the cornmeal. They ate quiet, the fire popping between them. "You always ride alone?" she asked finally. "Since my brother died," Silas said. "Used to run cattle together up near Prescott. He took a bullet in a card game over a lie someone told. After that, I did not see the point in staying still." He looked into the fire. "That was 4 years ago," Elijah nodded. "I was 18 when I married. We were going to start a ranch, raise goats. He was sweet, once. But then Susanna came too soon and he started talking like there was never enough." Silas did not offer pity. He just listened. When Samuel fell asleep by the fire, curled up with his head on Silas's saddle blanket, Elijah blinked hard and looked up. "You are good with him." "I was the younger brother," Silas said. "Had to learn patience." She smiled just a little. "You can stay the night." The desert turned cold after midnight. Elijah sat awake, back against the wagon wheel, the rifle across her lap. She heard the soft crunch of boots and saw Silas approaching, blanket over one shoulder. "Fire's low," he said. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded. For a while they said nothing. The wind whispered through the creosote and the moon was almost full. "I meant what I said," Silas murmured. "I do not want to cook. I have eaten plenty of good meals alone. That ain't what I miss." Elijah looked at him. "What do you miss?" He turned his head to her, eyes steady. "Waking up knowing someone's still there, not because they have to be, because they choose to be." She felt her chest ache. "You think I would choose to stay with someone I just met? I think you are strong enough to decide for yourself. And I think I would be lucky if you did." He stood, gave the fire a last stir, then nodded once and returned to his bedroll. Elijah did not sleep. Not because she was afraid, because for the first time in a long while she wasn't. The next morning, Samuel was the one who asked the question. "Mr. Silas, are you going to leave too?" Silas knelt beside him, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I told your mama I would stay until sundown, but if she tells me to stay longer, I will." Samuel looked to Elijah. "Can he stay?" She did not answer right away. Her eyes met Silas's across the fire. There was no pressure in his gaze, just quiet hope. "Yes," she said. "He can stay." Samuel beamed. Susanna clapped her hands, and Silas he smiled, real and full. By the time the sun crept high again, Silas had built a new brace under the wagon bed and helped Elijah rig a better shade tarp for the children. He handed her a small tin of coffee grounds from his pack. "You could have kept that," she said. "I do not need much." "Just a reason." She looked at him long enough that he felt it. The silence said more than words. Later they sat beside each other, not touching but close. The children napped beneath the wagon. The wind shifted west. Silas leaned in just a little. "You still think I am just being kind?" "No," she said. "I think you are being honest." He reached for her hand, slow like he was asking permission. She let him take it. "You hungry?" he asked softly. Elijah turned, eyes steady. "Or just lonely like you?" He smiled again. "Maybe both." And she squeezed his hand. "Then let us eat together. See where it goes." By the third morning the desert had shifted its mood. A high haze dulled the sun's bite, and the wind carried a warning sharp and dry, like the space before a storm. Silas studied the horizon while Elijah packed what little remained of their supplies into the wagon bed. He didn't interrupt her rhythm, just watched with a kind of quiet alertness that made her feel like she wasn't shouldering the day alone. "We'll need to head north," she said, tying down the canvas bundle with more force than necessary. "There's a trading post near Camp Verde. Might be able to barter for grain." Silas nodded. "That river valley runs long, cool mornings. Good grazing if we get lucky." "Won't be luck I'm trusting," she muttered. He gestured to the wagon tongue. "I can hitch the gelding. He'll pull light, but we should start early." Elijah paused. "You're just coming then? No askin'." Silas met her eyes. "I figured you'd say if you didn't want me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the children, still curled under the tarp. "They sleep better now. Don't wake crying." "That's not by accident." Elijah turned back to the wagon, and Silas didn't press. It took an hour to ready everything. The axle held under slow movement, and the gelding bore the weight without strain. They kept to the old military trail, ruts still faint from when the army caravans moved cannon through years back. Samuel walked ahead, stick in hand, pretending it was a sword. Susanna sat in the wagon, humming tunelessly, the way small children do when their bellies are full and the world feels safe. By midday, they'd stopped under a bluff dotted with cottonwood. The air was still, and the silence deep. Elijah handed water to Samuel while Silas unhooked the horse and checked its hooves. "You always know where you're going?" she asked, her voice low as she watched him work. "No," he said. "But I know when I'm going the right way." Elijah eased down beside a boulder and peeled an orange Silas had traded for that morning. "You talk like a man who's read too many sermons." He gave a low chuckle. "My mother used to say the same. She was part Shawnee. Believed in signs." "She's still living?" "No," he said. "Passed when I was 17. After that it was just my brother and me." Elijah handed him half the orange. You ever think of settling? He took the fruit, but it was a moment before he answered. Only if there's someone worth staying for. She didn't look away. And you think that might be me? I think you already know the answer. Elijah folded her arms. You lay your words out careful. I lay them honest. They sat a while longer, the heat pressing down, the cottonwoods rustling faintly overhead. When Susanna called for her mother, Elijah rose, brushing dust from her skirt. Before she turned, she said, if we make it to that post, I'll ask around for work. Silas stood too. I can break horses, fix harness, been paid for both. She nodded once. We'll see what's there. That night they camped beside a dry stream bed, the stars wide and sharp above. Silas built the fire from dead juniper branches, and Elijah braided Susanna's hair by lantern light. Samuel fell asleep with his head against Silas's leg, and neither of them commented on it. You afraid of staying too long in one place? She asked after the fire had settled low. I used to be, he said. Now I'm more afraid of not staying long enough. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't need to. The look she gave him in the hush between wind gusts said just enough. In the dark, as coyotes called far off, Elijah lay awake beside the wagon. The soft sound of Silas's breathing nearby steadied her thoughts. She felt no dread for morning, no weight of what had been, only the quiet possibility of something new, and that, for the first time in her life, felt like hope. They reached the Verd Valley on the 5th day, trailing the Mogollon Rim's shadow. The land softened, their green flared along the riverbanks, and the air held a coolness not felt since spring. Cottonwoods clustered thick, and the brown thread of the river wound through willows like it had nowhere else to be. Elijah stood in the shallow water, skirts hitched to her knees, scrubbing the children's shirts with a flat stone. Her fingers ached from the cold, but she didn't pull them free. Silas crouched nearby, mending a broken bridle strap with a blunt awl and a strip of rawhide. He worked without speaking, his eyes flicking now and then toward the children gathering pebbles along the bank. You always this quiet when things go easy? Elijah asked, wringing out the cotton with a twist. No, he said, threading the rawhide through the slit. Only when I don't want to ruin it. She glanced over. You think it'll stay easy? Not likely. He tied off the end and bit the knot tight. But I've learned not to waste the good parts waiting for them to end. Elijah set the shirts out on a flat rock to dry. You always talk like someone who's seen worse. I have, he said, standing, but I'd rather not talk about it unless you want to hear it. Maybe later, she said. I'd rather know what you plan to do once we reach the post. Silas dusted his hands on his trousers. Ask around for work. Try not to take anything I can't finish. You mean you're not looking to settle just yet? I'm not looking to drift either, he said. If you want to stay somewhere, I will. Elijah took a long moment to answer. I don't know yet. The post might be rough. Some of those places aren't kind to women without a man standing beside them. He stepped closer, voice even. Then I'll stand beside you. She didn't smile, but something in her face shifted like a door swung open just enough to let in air. I'd believe that more if I saw how you act when things turn hard. You will, he said. Sooner or later. They broke camp that afternoon, following the last bend of the river until the land opened up, and the outpost came into view. 3 squat buildings, a tin-roofed barn, and a weathered sign swinging from a split log brace. The trading post had a corral out back and a pair of mules tied off under a lean-to. A dog barked once, then went quiet. Elijah lifted Susanna into her arms and told Samuel to stay close. Silas walked ahead, rifle across his back, boots silent on the packed earth. A man stepped out of the post, his beard thick and gray, shirt half unbuttoned. We don't take in strangers overnight. We're not looking for charity, Elijah said before Silas could speak. We can pay, Or trade? The man's eyes dropped to the children, then to Sela's. You two together. Elijah didn't look away. We are. Silas didn't speak, but he stepped closer to Elijah, his hand brushing hers. She let it rest there. The man scratched his chin. You got gear to mend or stock to trade, I'll look at it. There's a woman back runs a room above the barn. She might take you in if you help with laundry. Elijah nodded once. That'll do. They spent the next 2 days there. Elijah worked beside the post matron, a widow named Lena who didn't ask questions and offered her bread crusts without comment. Samuel played in the dust with the blacksmith's boy, and Susanna followed Elijah from basin to basin with a wooden spoon clutched in her fist. Silas repaired harnesses for 2 freighters and helped clear a broken axle from the main trail. He came back each evening with dirt under his nails and news of work in the hills north of miners' camp needing wagons repaired and tools sharpened. He didn't mention going unless Elijah did. That second night, they sat on the barn's back stoop after the children had gone to sleep. The moon hung low behind a bank of clouds, and the only sound was the soft creak of the windmill turning slow. I found a man today, Silas said, voice quiet. Said he knew your husband. Elijah didn't move. What did he say? He's in Yuma, working rail lines. Told folks he lost his wife and children to fever. She let out a breath. That sounds like him. Silas looked at her, careful. You want me to go after him? No, she said. I stopped waiting for him when Susanna turned one. Silas didn't press. He looked out at the dark stretch of field beyond the barn. That miner's camp, it's rough work, but steady. They'd pay enough for feed and seed. Could get a few goats, maybe chickens. You thinking of starting something? I'm thinking of staying if you want me to. Elijah turned to face him. You already said you didn't want to cook. I meant it. And you still want a partner. He reached for her hand, slow and certain. Only if she wants the same. She held his hand in hers, letting her fingers settle between his like they belonged. I don't want someone to save me. I want someone who stays when it's hard. I don't run, he said, and I don't bend. They sat in silence a long while. Then, without ceremony, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't move. And when the wind shifted and brought the smell of rain from the south, neither of them turned away. The miners' camp sat 3 days northeast, past a low pass where the juniper thinned and the soil turned red and brittle. Elijah rode beside the wagon now, not behind it, her hand steady on the reins of a gray mule Lena had loaned her in exchange for a week's worth of washing. Samuel sat beside her, wrapped in a short coat Silas had cut down from his own, and Susanna slept in a sling across her chest. They traveled early and camped before dusk, following goat trails and dry arroyos, the wagon rattling less now that Silas had reinforced the undercarriage with a second beam. He didn't speak much on the trail. He watched the ridge lines and checked the horse's legs each morning with quiet care. Elijah noticed how he never turned his back on the children, how he always walked wide around her mule so it wouldn't spook. Their second night out, they stopped beneath a sandstone overhang where the wind couldn't reach. Silas lifted Samuel onto a flat boulder and handed him a tin cup of warm rice. Elijah sat with her back against the stone, letting Susanna nurse beneath her shawl. You ever wondered what you'd be if you hadn't married so young? Silas asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. No one ever asked me that. I'm asking now. Elijah looked toward the fire. I think I'd have learned to read better. Maybe taught in a town school. I liked books when I could get 'em. Silas nodded. You speak like someone who listens close. That's half the learning right there. She raised an eyebrow. What would you have been? He poked at the fire with a stick, his face lit orange and gold. I used to think I'd make furniture. My mother's people carved cedar boxes with stories on them, not just for keepsakes meant to be passed on. I like that. You make anything now. I've whittled a few things, nothing fine, just enough to keep my hands from turning idle. Elijah studied him. You ever think of carving something again? He looked up. If there's a place to keep it, I might. She didn't say anything, but her expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before, not around the children, not even when they'd first touched hands. That night, after the fire burned low, Elijah stepped out from the wagon and found Silas standing watch, rifle across his chest. The stars hung low and close, and somewhere an owl called once, then fell quiet. "I can take a turn," she said. He shook his head. "You sleep. I'll wake you if there's need." She hesitated. "Are you staying because you gave your word or because you want to?" Silas turned, his face unreadable in the dark. "If I only stayed for my word, I'd be gone already." Elijah stepped closer. "Then what keeps you?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You, not what you do, not what you've been through, just you." She didn't answer, but she didn't step back. They reached the camp on the fourth morning. Smoke rose in 3 thin columns from cook fires, and the sound of hammers echoed off the canyon walls. The men there nodded but didn't speak much, and the foreman, a squat man named Harlan with a bent nose and tobacco-stained fingers, offered Silas a job fixing wheel hubs and sharpening picks. When Elijah asked about work, Harlan waved her off. "Women don't do well here. It's rough living and rough men." "She's not afraid of either," Silas said. Harlan spat into the dirt. "Still don't mean she'll be welcome." "She ain't looking to be welcome," Silas said. "She's looking to earn." Harlan eyed Elijah, then shrugged. "She can wash and cook for the smithy crew if she wants. They're too tired to care who's tending the fire." Elijah nodded once. "That'll do." They set their wagon near the edge of camp, close enough to hear the clatter of tools but far from the dice games and shouting. Samuel helped stack firewood, and Susanna played with smooth stones, her laugh carrying across the dry ground. That evening, Silas brought back a half-finished plank from the carpenter's pile and sat carving by lantern light. Elijah watched his hands shape the grain, slow and sure, until the curves began to show. Not a box, a cradle, small and plain but strong. "You makin' that for someone else?" she asked. "No," he said. "I figure we'll need it." She didn't speak, but she reached for his hand. This time she didn't let go, and he didn't need her to say anything to know what she meant. By early spring, the snowmelt from the distant peaks had swollen the creek beds around the mining camp, and the soil had turned soft beneath the wagon's wheels. Elijah stood barefoot in the warming mud behind the lean to where she washed for the smithy crew, her skirts hitched to her calves and her arms deep in a basin of shirts that reeked of smoke and metal. The air smelled like wet iron and pine sap, and for once, the sky held no ash. Inside the camp, men hollered over the clatter of carts and the hiss of quenching steel, but out behind the cookhouse, it was quiet enough to hear the bees moving through the sagebrush. Silas was on the ridge above, helping rig a pulley system for the ore carts. He'd taken to the work with the kind of steadiness that made other men fall in line without question. Elijah had watched the way they deferred to him now, not out of fear, but because he never raised his voice unless he meant it. She scrubbed until her hands stung, then stood with her eyes closed, letting the sun dry the sweat on her neck. It had crept up on her, the stillness, the kind that didn't come from being alone, but from knowing no one would leave. Samuel had taken to following the blacksmith, watching the shaping of iron with wide-eyed wonder and stealing lengths of wire to twist into his own inventions. Susanna had learned to say mule and had taken to shouting it at every passing animal, much to the delight of the haulers. Elijah had started sleeping through the night. That evening, as the sky turned the color of burnt clay, Silas came down the trail with a cut across his knuckles and blood drying from his wrist to his thumb. "You need that looked at," Elijah asked, taking his hand without waiting for an answer. Got caught on a bent nail. Nothing deep. She led him to the stump beside the fire and dipped a cloth in boiled water, pressing it to the wound while he sat still, eyes on her face. You want to know what I did today? He asked. You already told me. No, I mean before all that. I asked Harlan what it'd take to buy the broken land west of the ridge, the stretch with the cottonwoods and the spring runoff. Elijah paused. What did he say? He laughed. Said he'd sell it for cheap so long as someone was fool enough to try and plant there. She wiped the last of the blood from his palm. And are you? I might be. She didn't let go of his hand. You planning to do it alone? No, he said. Not unless you ask me to. She looked toward the wagon, where Samuel was lighting the lantern with careful hands, and Susanna slept curled beneath the quilt Elijah had stitched from old shirts and flour sacks. There's a plot behind the cottonwoods, she said. It's shaded and close to water. Could fence it in, keep goats, maybe hens, he nodded. I already marked the trees. She leaned back, arms crossed. You always decide before asking. I decide what I can build. But I don't build unless you say yes. The fire popped, and behind them the wind carried the scent of mesquite and damp earth. Elijah folded her hands in her lap. I've lived through enough to know comfort's not given. It's made. And you've made it, bit by bit, without asking what you'd get back. Silas didn't speak. He didn't need to. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. Inside was a small cedar carving unfinished, but unmistakable. The cradle he'd started had grown into a keepsake box. On the lid he'd etched a pattern of wild rye and river stones. You left this under the wagon, she said. I meant to give it to you when I was done. I'll take it like this, she said. I like seeing it half finished, means there's more to come. He reached up, touched the side of her face. His hand was warm, calloused, healing. I love you, he said, voice low, steady, not out of need. She didn't look away. I know, and I love you, not because you stayed, but because you never asked me to follow. He kissed her then, not quick, not shy, but like a promise sealed without ceremony. When they pulled apart, the firelight danced across their faces, and the stars came out in full. They married 3 days later under the cottonwoods, with Samuel holding a sprig of sage in place of a ring, and the smithy crew gathered in plain shirts and clean boots. Harlan stood off to the side, arms crossed, and when the vows were done, he handed Silas a folded deed and said, You break ground by Monday, or I'll think you changed your mind. I don't change my mind, Silas said, and Elijah smiled so wide her cheeks ached. They built the house in stages. First the frame, then the porch, then the roof. Elijah planted onions and beans in a raised bed behind the wash shed, and Silas rigged a rain barrel from a rusted drum and a length of pipe. Samuel built a wind chime from spoons and tin, and Susanna learned to walk with her fingers curled in Silas's pant leg. The dirt under their nails no longer came from someone else's burden. It came from their own work, their own soil. They never asked for more than they needed, and they never left a thing undone. On quiet evenings, Elijah read from a weathered primer by firelight, her voice soft and sure. Silas carved by the window, his hands shaping cedar into the curve of a rocking chair. When spring turned to summer and the wildflowers bloomed in the low hollows, Elijah stood on the porch with one hand resting on her belly, watching Silas lead the mule down toward the creek. He turned, just once, to look back at her. She raised her hand and he tipped his hat. Behind her, the house smelled of stew and fresh bread. Samuel's laughter echoed through the rafters. Susanna napped beneath the open window, her breath even and deep. And Elijah, who had once stood alone beside a broken wagon in the desert, now stood in the heart of something whole. Something built slow with care. She did not question it. She did not fear it. She simply lived it every day beside the man who had never promised ease, only truth. And she had chosen him again and again until the choosing no longer needed words. They never left the cottonwood land. Not once.